Hey, welcome to another Solidarity Talks. I'm with Janice Abbott, CEO of Atira, and I'm Vikki Reynolds. I'm a white settler on these territories. I'm in the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Yeah, maybe Janice, if you just locate yourself, that would be great.
Sure. So as you already said, I'm Janice Abbott. I am also located on the unceded/stolen territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam folks. I was born in Vancouver, raised up the coast in a place called Powell River. And I am of Northern European, Norwegian and Irish, as well as Nisqually from the Shuswap Nation ancestry by way of my paternal grandmother.
And so what is it that you do at Atira? What do you do?
What do I do at Atira?
Yeah, and maybe bigger, like what do you do, period, because it's not all at Atira.
Yeah, so I do a little bit of everything. We're a big organization, but I've been here for going on 29 years, I guess. And so I started out a very small organization and doing, even though I've always been kind of the boss, I guess is the right language. I started out doing frontline work because of the size of the organization. And I continue to do some level of frontline work because I feel like it keeps me grounded in what it is that we're doing. So, and why I do this work, and keeps me sort of current on the, the shit that is the world. So I do everything from frontline work to negotiating real estate deals and everything in between.
Yeah, and just say briefly, like what Atira is.
Atira is a big nonprofit organization. Our core mandate still centers women and particularly women who've experienced violence. So we're a women's anti-violence organization. We're a group of 5 entities actually, with Atira Women's Resource Society being the mothership or the center organization, the oldest organization. It was founded in 1983. But we also have 2 wholly owned for-profit subsidiaries and 2 affiliated nonprofit organizations, one of which is a nonprofit development society, and we build mostly mixed income, all gender housing in that organization. And one of which is a property management company where we, Atira Women, subcontracts our all gender programs to be operated by the property management company, but they also do market property management, earn a fee, which they then donate their profits back to Atira Women's Resource Society. So yeah, that's us.
Yeah, and then you use that what do you do with that profit?
We use all of the profits to build housing, non-market housing. Our focus is always women and children. So right now we have 3 buildings under development, 2 in the downtown east side, 1 in Strathcona, 1 in what people now call Crosstown, and another one in Port Kwikwetlem. I don't know which people, I don't call it Crosstown, but yeah. But people out there do. Yeah. But we also build all gender housing. So we've got another project where we're using the profits from earned by the development society as well as by the property management company to build a big 192 unit mixed income building with a daycare and social enterprise space. That's on Alexander Street. The other thing we do is the property management company is worth money. Like we could sell it to somebody for a fair amount of money. And so we leverage it. We borrow against it to be able to buy land and start projects.
Cool, that's cool. And Atira's got such humble, meaningful beginnings. I'm always really interested in, what is like the ethical positioning for the work? What is it about Atira that drew you, that was a fit for you? And what is it like kind of at the heart of your ethical connection to Atira?
So essentially, when I started at Atira, it was a typical sort of transition house. We were a single transition house in South Surrey, White Rock, called Atira Transition House, oddly enough. It was started by a really dedicated group of mostly social workers and financial aid workers who saw a need for a shelter for women fleeing violence back in the 80s. They opened the first transition house in 1987. I started working at Atira in 1992. It was a pretty typical transition house at that time. So we hired women who had, you had to have a university degree to get a job at Atira. We had a screening tool, and we screened out women who told us, that they also struggled with substance use, or if they struggled with mental wellness, then they weren't. Then the argument was that we didn't have the skills to accommodate them, and so we would refuse them access. So what happened I started at the end of September in 1992. By 1993, and based, largely on my own lived experience. I grew up in a violent home. I started using substances at the age of about 13, maybe 12 or 13, to cope with the violence that was going on in my childhood home. And so I understood sort of intrinsically the connection between women's experience of violence and substance use. And there was a particular incident that happened not long after I started there. A woman came in with her 4 children. I can't remember why, but she was with us for an extended period of time. She had left a fairly high-level gang-affiliated drug dealer who was violent. She was flying back home to Ontario so the kids could be with their parents. She could go into treatment. And she relapsed while she was at Atira. And because our mandate or our practice suggested that we would have had to ask her to leave if she told us, she neither told us nor did we bring it up with her, even though we knew she had relapsed. And I can remember we were sitting at a staff meeting, this would have been in early January or late January 1993, and just saying, this is crazy. We've missed an opportunity to support this woman around her substance use, and all because we have this screening tool that says we would have had to ask her to leave. So in early 93, we started talking about tossing out our screening tools, and we did that year. And at that time in 1993, we were the only women's transition house that was accepting women who acknowledged struggling with substance use and struggling with mental wellness. And so that's really when we started to grow.
And that wasn't that wasn't a tool Atira made. That wasn't found, as you said, that was from funding, right?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
Was it whose idea was it to not serve women who were struggling with the stuff that gets called mental illness, addiction? And
honestly, I don't know. I can talk about some of the conversations I had with other women's organizations at the time, but it was pre-existing. So, and it was common, and to some extent, it continues to happen in some transition houses still. Although the whole sector has started to shift, and in part due to the Society of Transition Houses has been doing training and supporting, like the world has changed. But back at the time, I can remember hearing phrases like, we don't have the skills to deal with women who are struggling with mental wellness. We can only support, and this was actually a phrase that was used in 1992, 93, we can only support normal battered women. I remember that one well, that conversation well. So, and mostly because I remember thinking, what the fuck is a normal battered woman? I'm not entirely sure what that is. But it was just the way things were then.
Yeah. And what I'm just thinking is about the ways that you speak so eloquently of resisting this idea that what is a normal battered woman. Like, maybe just share some of your thoughts about how you do see women who are responding to violence.
Yeah. So I'm going to confess, I don't know if this is cool or not cool, or as kids are saying today, chubby. I might be chubby, but back in early on, I started reading a lot of Thomas Satz's work, and a lot of it resonated with me, not all. And maybe if I reread it, it wouldn't resonate at all with me anymore. But when I was reading it in the 80s and 90s, it certainly resonated with me. And I've always thought that,
Just to catch everybody up, Thomas Says is an anti-psychiatrist.
yeah,
Got it.
psychiatrist, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really resonated with me was he and others said that, you know, people's responses are just normal responses to basically the stuff going on in the world. Like, it would be abnormal not to have some kind of a response to being beaten up, or to, you know, living in a conflict zone, or like, these are normal responses to the kinds of things that are going on in lives and in the world. And so, you know, I always thought, I remember saying early on, and this I think is often what you refer to, is there's nothing wrong with women that not being raped and murdered and assaulted won't cure, and not being afraid of being raped, murdered, and assaulted won't cure. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not saying that there isn't biologically based mental illness. What I'm saying is, when I know what's going on in women's lives, I'm not in a position to decide what it is. Their anger, their behavior, and now I'm quoting you, it can all be explained. It can be explained by what's going on in their lives. And so rushing to this idea that there must be something wrong with them is unfathomable to me.
And, you know, it's interesting around that time that, you know, there's this language that women in particular working in transition homes were not skilled enough or qualified, out of our scope to work with mental illness, addiction, and trauma. I'm just wondering also, at that time, the qualifications for the work was university and academia, right? We weren't talking about peers or people with lived experience or people with living experience. That was not of value, right? Those were clients, right? We're the well and the good, and they're the broken. How did you start to break down that wall and change having a university educated population of workers who aren't qualified to work with this struggle? Because that is not the picture I have of Atira.
So that was a decision that I made almost as soon as I started at Atira, was to ditch the requirement that women had a university degree. Not that there's anything wrong with the university degree. Of course, we have women who work here who have university degrees. But I decided almost as soon as I started working there that we would focus on women who had lived experience. And mostly because women with lived experience have the ability to empathize. They've been in that place, they've walked in that place before. And I think it's about reflecting the women we serve. And I think women tend to respond better to someone that they know has been there before them, or maybe there with them at present. I also know that women have developed spectacular coping skills to deal with the violence in their lives and the violence they've experienced, and those coping skills are often seen to be dysfunctional, but they actually work. And so, you know, women can come and really be able to empathize with and have compassion for each other when they've been through the same experience. It's not perfect, but neither are university degrees. Don't necessarily create a perfect women's anti-violence worker either. So
yeah, one of my first trips up north to the Yukon was to train anti-violence workers in shelters these Indigenous women had started. They had survived residential school and state violence and torture. They'd survived all kinds of violence in relationship. They'd created these transition homes. And then within a decade, then by the 90s, they felt totally unqualified to work in them, because all of a sudden the women who were coming were like borderline personality disorder and cocaine-induced psychosis. And so I went up to the Yukon to teach addiction, mental illness, and trauma. And I called the workshop Reminding You What You Already Know.
Yeah.
And just like what I'm going to do is somebody with a master's degree, and you know, now I have even more. What I'm going to do is just take this language and interpret it into, put it on the ground for you. And what we came up with is something, language I still use today, is that, you know, all of these women are actually howling at the moon. That's what they're doing. That's a better description. And that every woman working there with lived and living experience knows exactly what to do with a woman who's howling at the moon. They don't know what to do with cocaine-induced psychosis. They don't know what to do with a personality disorder. That means it's not amenable to change and the person can't ever make change. So I'm just thinking about, you were onto those ideas like a decade before that.
Yeah, so I think, what I always remind women here when we're doing either staff meetings or new staff orientations or whatever is that at the end of the day, it's our relationships with women that are going to carry us through those difficult moments. It's not a university degree. It's not, a ABC point form kind of list of this is what you do when someone does this. It's the strength of our relationships. And so half of our work is watching movies with women and eating popcorn and talking about being teenagers, because developing that relationship, strengthening that relationship is what's going to get you through the times when I guess, to use your language, women are howling at the moon. It's reminding them that you and I know each other. You and I have this relationship. Remember when? And those moments are going to happen. And the other thing I always remind women here too is we learn by our mistakes, and so we can't be afraid to make mistakes. We are going to be in the moment with a woman and do the wrong thing, and we just have to remember when we usually know it's my personal experience. You know immediately when you've said something wrong or you've done something wrong. So then it's about acknowledging, apologizing, moving on, not being afraid to reflect or consider the possibility you made a mistake, because we will, and that's how we learn. So these are human relationships. These are woman to woman human relationships, and they're imperfect. And so we have to do our best to make them strong so they get us through the hard times.
Yeah, I remember hearing you say at like a workshop when we were with one of the Atira teams, just something about as long as women serving the folks, women are at the center of what you're doing, you're going to get backed up.
Yeah. As long as what I tell staff when I do the new staff orientations, as long as the mistake you make is in air of supporting women, you're going to be okay. And there's really no mistake you can make short of something egregious, which I hope we would never get through our screening process, like punching someone in the face. We're going to work through it, and you can't be afraid to have a conversation about what might have worked better, to reflect on the decisions you made. But I also let women here know that we have a practice manual, but they're guidelines as well. Because you're in the moment, you're the woman with a relationship with that woman. I can write, what do you do if someone tells you she's suicidal? I can go to a textbook, I can write a policy around that. But again, you maybe have been living with that woman 40 hours a week for the last month. You have a relationship, you know her, you know what's going on in that moment. If the guidelines are helpful to you, use them. But if they're not, try something different based on your relationship with her. So again, it's work with human beings. It's imperfect.
How do you decide like what qualifies a person to come work with alongside you? What are you looking for?
So we're looking for women who have a experience with their relationship to violence. So they've had some experience in their life, whether it's direct or through familial relationships or friendships. So they have some compassion for and understanding of what it's like. We absolutely are looking for women who understand intersectional feminism. So I want to know when someone starts here that they know about the residential school system. They understand the impact of the residential school system. They understand why it's still affecting people today. They understand that colonialism is ongoing, that it wasn't something that happened 100 years ago, that it's actually ongoing today. They understand the experiences of, or have empathy for the experiences of refugee and immigrant women. They understand racism, they understand misogyny, they understand trans misogyny. So, and then there's very, and not just that they understand it, but that they share our values around it. We've been a trans inclusive organization since the late 90s, probably. So I want to know that they've been to, they read, they understand what we're all about, that they share our values, and I want to know that they're good communicators, that they're going to tell us when they're struggling, they're going to give us an opportunity to support them, that they're going to have empathy for the women we work with.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that sounds what's on the road there. What do you think it is that qualifies you to do this work? Like where in your life did you get, like, what is it from your life experience, like culturally, spiritually, lived experience, education, like what is it you think qualifies you for the work?
Um, I have to sort of start out by saying that, the older I get, the easier my life has become. And, it's been a long time since I've been young. I
Yeah,
was going to say sadly, but I'm not actually sad about that. It's just been a long time since I've been young.
yeah,
So I do want to acknowledge that. But I grew up in a family that struggled with intergenerational trauma. There was violence in my family. My parents weren't problematic drinkers, but there were problematic drinkers in the generations before. Um, there was a lot of violence, and so like many kids who grow up in homes that are violent, and particularly I was an only girl. I had only brothers, and so there was, speaking of my generation, there were certain expectations on me as the only girl. My job was too busy looking after the entire family. When my dad was violent, it was sort of my job to kind of keep the peace. And so you grow up really fast when you grow up as a child in those circumstances. And, I felt like an adult by the time I was 12 or 13, and I started behaving like I was an adult, even though I didn't have the maturity or the life skills necessary to be in the world that way. I spent a lot of my teenage years kind of adrift, away from home. And so, yeah, so I was, I was still relatively young when I started working at Atira, so fairly close to all of those experiences. I had been through a couple of abusive relationships of my own. And so I came to the work with a passion for the work. And I think that I carry. I certainly could have left Atira many times over the last 28 years. And I remember I had I went into therapy when I was about 25 or 26 to try and start to address just some of my childhood stuff. And I went back to see her. She was awesome. We all fall in love with our first therapist, or most of us do anyway.
yeah,
So I continue to remember her as being awesome. But I went back to see her after I'd started working at Atira. I had probably seen her in about 5 years. And I remember her asking me, why are you doing this work? You can do feminism anywhere. Why would you put yourself back into this kind of place? And yeah, I don't know. It's just what I want to do. I don't think I'd be good at other kinds of, or not as good at or effective at other kinds of work as I am at this, because I care about a lot of things, but not as much as I care about women's anti-violence work.
yeah. One of the questions I'm always asking is, what is the best use of me? What is the best use of you? It seems like you've created a space that's the best use of you.
Yeah. I could, I guess, go work for a private sector developer and build market housing, but I'm not sure how happy I would be, and I probably wouldn't be very good at it, even though I'm good at it here.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be very good at it anywhere else.
Yeah. What do you think? So how long do you think you've been working against violence? Well, paid and unpaid, probably since your child.
Yeah. So this was actually, I volunteered for about women's end. So a couple of things. My first sort of job or career or whatever you want to call it out of school was as a journalist. So I went to SFU, then I did a journalism diploma at Langara College, and I worked as a journalist, and I started writing, and I think I really sort of discovered my passion for doing this work because I started writing about violence against women, about the transition house, and in the little community newspaper I worked at, about there were a couple of big stories at the time, tragic stories, stepfathers killing daughters, and I worked in the Fraser Valley, and it was with respect to violence against women and sexual abuse of children, it was a pretty significant amount of stuff going on back then when I was there. And so that's when I first sort of discovered my passion to want to do this work, is when I started writing women's stories. And then I started out volunteering for a couple of years at a couple of different women's organizations before I landed at Atira.
And if you it's just been such a long haul. I'm just thinking, how do you manage your sustainability? How do you stay alive in this work? What do you do?
I had a woman who was on my board, another therapist. My life is full of therapists, although she wasn't mine. But a woman who was on my board when I first started in Atira, her name was Heather Whiteford. And I remember her name probably still is Heather Whiteford. I'm sure it is. And I remember her telling me something that's kind of stuck with me, a pretty simple message. And there was a young woman who was staying at Atira. This would have been in the early 90s. And she came in, the intake was done over the weekend. She was 14 years old. I came in on the Monday. And I was talking to her and whatever. And then I went back into the office and I said, "Oh, where's her mom?" And said, "Well, actually, she came in as a 14-year-old on her own." And anyway, I ended up getting quite connected, and I still actually have a connection with her. She's now living in Germany, but we still remain connected. And she had, a really difficult story. There was a reason she was in the transition house at the age of 14 on her own, right? And I got quite connected with her. And everything that was happening to her was upsetting me. And I remember debriefing with Heather as a board member, I guess my supervisor at the time. And she said something to me again that stuck with me, which is, "It's not your story. It's not your story." I'm probably paraphrasing her at this point, but she said, and when you take it on like it's yours, you're stealing her story, you're stealing her emotions, you're stealing her pain. And that was a bit of a light bulb that went on for me at that moment, is that, these aren't my stories, and I have a different kind of a role. And and I don't want to steal women's pain. I want to bear witness to it. I want to support them around it, but I don't want to steal their stories or their pain.
Mm-hmm. There's something about appropriation of those, appropriation of story and experience and stuff that really happens a lot in professionalism.
Yeah. And that really has, it kept me. I'm reminded, like, it's not to say I'm not impacted. Over the years I've been at Atira, and for whatever reasons that we make connections with certain people, I've made connections with women, some of whom have died, some of whom have disappeared, some of whom have moved on. And it's not that I'm not impacted by their stories at all, or by the experience of knowing them or having known them, and profoundly impacted sometimes in life-changing ways, which is what profound means. I just doubled down there. So
you're such a journalist. You're editing yourself now.
But I am reminded that their stories are their own. They belong to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My partner handed me an article that I've referenced, which is, if you're walking a mile in someone else's shoes, you've probably stolen their shoes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then I think about Heather Gilmore, who I knew from Rain City, who was hired in a kind of peer role because of struggles with mental illness. And Heather responded to actually a murder in the downtown east side of someone known to us. And I was kind of, quote, supervising or doing solidarity work with that team around it. And, she ended up leaving, taking off no days from work, showing up because she felt people needed her to be there to see that she was okay and stuff. And I kept along and connected with her. And then I asked her, further on down the road, I was like, "You're really okay? Like, how do you explain that you're okay with this?" And the first thing she said to me was like, "I figured out this is not my tragedy.
Yeah.
It's not my tragedy,
Yeah. There's another thing that Heather Whiteford, I wonder if she's out there and knows how significantly she changed how I view the world in some ways. But But another thing that I remember, there was another incident at Atira in probably the late 90s where she told me one of the worst things that you can do, like what you think you're helping by, so someone has experienced something horrible and you're saying, you know, take some time off, look after yourself, are you okay? And I remember her saying to me over a specific incident, the worst thing you can do to someone who feels like they're a little bit of out of control, like they've lost a bit of control of their lives, is take more away from them. So make it known that you support them, that if you know if they want to take time off, that they have your support, but don't ever insist that, pretend that you know, or insist that you know what's best for somebody else. Just listen and be there. And in this particular incident, or the incident that caused this, is we had a woman who worked here when we started a new program in 1997, and I found that it wasn't a 24/7, it was second stage. I found out through the grapevine that she'd been sleeping overnight trying to get the program stabilized. And I remember meeting with her and being worried about her and saying, you know, I need you to take vacation, you need to take time off, you can't sleep. And she just said no. And that's, I was saying to Heather, you know, I don't know what to do with this. And she said, well, she probably feels like everything's a little bit out of control right now. Don't take more away from her. Don't take her decisions away from her. And yeah, that advice has served me well.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm just thinking, where, like, you know, this is violence against women is not something we've got a handle on.
No.
Gang rape is up. The homicide of women is up. Femicide in our culture. The murders of trans women, you know, is way up. And given all of that, like, where do you find sites of hope? Like, where's your believed in hope? What keeps you afloat that way?
So I'm an atheist. I don't believe in an afterlife or a all-powerful God. This is going to sound odd, but that gives me strength. I gain strength from not thinking there's something else, that you've got to make the best of what you've got, because there's nothing after and there was nothing before, and I'm okay with that. I'm good with that, and it gives me strength knowing that this is whatever time we're allotted is the time we have to do something positive. And I think that even though I don't believe in a God or something sort of all powerful, I do believe in people. Mm-hmm. I believe, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, in spite of everything that's going on in the world, I continue to believe that in the power of the human spirit. And I see hope in the Black Lives Matter marches, in the Idle No More marches, in the work of women who are protesting and advocating for better policies and better practice and more money, in the Red Dress Day and the missing and murdered women advocates. I see hope in all of that work. And change doesn't come as fast as it should, or as we all would like it to be, but I see these passionate, outspoken, willing to put, and sometimes their lives on the line to change the world. And I continue to just have a great deal of hope from all of that.
Yeah. And what about at Atira? What are some of the programs or some of the stuff you're doing, or some stories from folks? Like, what is going on at Atira right now that amplifies your hope, keeps you connected to something believable?
Yeah. So we have so many amazing folks who work here, so many amazing folks. And because I've always tried to kind of stay in the mix, I guess. I'm not one of those people that has a corner office and does my very best to avoid the front line or the operational work. And so I have good relationships with a lot of folks. I respond to emails and questions from anybody who asks me. And through that, I'm able to meet a lot of really amazing people who work here and here for all the same reasons we all do this work, who feel passionate about the jobs that they're doing, have compassion for the people they work with and who are here because they want to change the world. And there's a lot of them. And I am inspired every minute of every day by something someone here suggests or has done or is doing. In particular right now, I'm watching Erin Monroe's and Colt set up the Aoki Ross House, which is the new housing program for transgender two-spirit folks on Alexander Street, and the care and passion that's going into getting that operational. The Sister Space, the women who work at Sister Space. I'm reluctant to call people peers. They're staff. They're women who have a job that they come to. I know it's kind of commonly used language, but it's hard to differentiate for me. But I look at those women who are saving lives and creating space for women to develop relationships with each other in a very chaotic world for them. Sister Square, how quickly we got that up and running, and the fact that we've got women working tirelessly to find the money to keep Sister Square going, because it's not a funded program, but we have up to 400 women a day who use that space.
Can you just say quickly what Sister Space is?
Yeah.
And what
Sure. Sister Space is, as far as we know, still the world's only women only. Essentially, it's a safe injection site. And what makes it different than other safe injection sites, besides the fact that it's women only, is that it's based on relational work. So we don't have time limits. Women can come in. We have far fewer overdoses than other safe injection sites, mostly because we don't rush women out, and so they use their dope leisurely, or their drugs leisurely. So instead of injecting everything in their 15-minute window, they use it over time. They're there for a couple hours. They also develop relationships with each other. We just completed what's called a utilization evaluation of Sister Space. And one of the most interesting questions or that struck me most was, we asked women, do you have someone at Sister Space that you would consider a friend and someone you say hi to on the street? And everybody did. Everybody. We had 89 women respond to the surveys, and every single one of them said they had at least one friend at Sister Space, or one woman that they considered a friend in the community. And Sister Square is an extension of Sister Space. So it's a tent that we set up after the pandemic was declared, because we had to restrict the numbers of women in Sister Space. So it's a tent. And what's been really great about Sister Square is we didn't have smoking space inside of Sister Space because it was enclosed. And so we have a lot of women who smoke. I'm assuming it's clear that that's not cigarettes, but who smoke, who use Sister Square.
Yeah. Wow. And then, I'm just thinking about, it's lovely the way you're like messing with the language of peer, but I mean, Atira's, for me, because I work lots of different places, Atira's always had the most diverse staffing. One of the things we're always looking for is service equity, right? That the people who are serving you, like, you're reflected in the people that are trying to help you. And I love, we can't abandon the language of peer, because we need to acknowledge in so many places where people's qualification and stuff comes from, but it's been so exploited, and then people don't get hired or don't get paid the same or don't get benefits and stuff. Maybe say something about the staffing, like the culture of who's the folks there working.
Sure. So we've always, well, since 1992, I guess, when I made the decision to ditch the requirement for university education, we've really had a focus on hiring women who reflect the women we serve. Right now, about 40% of our staff identify as First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. Another 42 or 43% identify as women of color, and including about 30% who identify as Black. We speak more than 50 languages across the organization. We have women who range in age from about 18 up to 67 or 68 years old. I think, in fact, we have one woman, Katzie, who must be in her early 70s now. She's worked for us for almost as long as I have. So we just really worked hard, and it's a concerted effort. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised at how easily when you take your eye off the ball, and when I say you, I mean us or I, how easily white supremacy slips in, and like, so it's a concerted effort, and we do have an incredibly inclusive staff, and I think it's the most authentic way we can show women that we value them, is to reflect the women we serve, and we absolutely do.
Yeah. And when I think about Sister Space, because I've had the honor of going in there and hanging with that crew and trying to be of use to them and stuff. When I think about that, I think about this is just a response. The reason it works is you actually asked women what they wanted, and then that's what you did. Like, it's a pretty simple model, but it sure goes against funding and all that other kind of stuff. And I'm just thinking, can you just say something about the collaboration with community and women, like how women's voices matter and how they're responded to?
Yeah, so we fought to have Sister Space, or a women only safe injection space open for probably about a decade, mostly because we were hearing from women that the only safe injection site that was around for a while, and thank goodness it was, Insight is awesome. But for a lot of women, it wasn't a safe place some of the time, at least. For some women, it wasn't a safe place ever. For some women, it wasn't a safe place some of the time. And mostly because they were, standing in line or using the side or forced to be in the same space as someone they owed money to or who had raped them or assaulted them. So they would go to use the space and see somebody in the line that they didn't want to see and leave. And so women were telling us this, and we were advocating. And we, when the opioid poisoning epidemic started, or pandemic started, we really felt like it was even more necessary than before that this space get open. And so we were eventually able to get some one-time money from Vancouver Coastal Health. And it isn't annualized now, it's still sort of project funding. And what we did when we opened Sister Spaces, we also undertook a developmental evaluation. So we hired an evaluator who spoke to women as I think about once a month, or maybe it was once every 2 weeks as we were opening, and asked them, how's this going? How's it working? What would you do differently? And what we heard through that developmental evaluation is what made Sister Space accessible and safe and comfortable for women were the peer workers. We heard that over and over and over again. And so we've really focused on maintaining those peer workers and doing our best to, keep them comfortable and supported in their roles, because women just, that's what we heard. That was the strongest thing we heard.
Yeah, but all kinds of people ask quote clients, or they do research and ask consultants, stuff like that, but then what you say doesn't matter. Frary says in dialogue, it's not enough to be allowed to speak, to be listened to. Your words have to matter, and there has to be an accountability to them, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And it's it's not always possible. It's one of the struggles that I have with research, is exactly what you described there. Is people come in research, I don't know how many times we've heard from women, we've done that already and nothing has changed. So women are pretty cynical, especially in the downtown east side, because we've been studied to death down here, and nothing is different. So if you're going to do studies or do evaluations, you really have to be prepared to make the changes that you're asked to make. I say within reason, because sometimes your funding doesn't allow, but then you have to be honest.
Yeah.
We would love to be able to do this thing, but we need someone to support it. And
yeah. The other thing that's just been kind of floating over our heads, like as long as I've known you, is just watching the kind of misogynist attacks against you personally, but also Atira being, am I wrong? I think the only kind of feminist-based housing group in the Lower Mainland.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely the largest feminist based and the only feminist based housing organization.
Yeah. And I just think, but one of the teachings from feminism, intersectional feminism, like we're talking about, is that if you speak truth to power, there's going to be a backlash, like truth, you know, power systems that are, you know, colonizing, white supremacist, and, you know, replicating patriarchy are not going to take that like, oh yeah, no, right, Atira, you're right. Yeah, they're gonna come back full blown. I'm just wondering if you, yeah, just anything you wanted to say about that relationship, that constant
Sure.
resistance to misogyny that's been required.
So I'll say a couple of things. So I, you know, made the mistake or had the privilege, depending on the way you look at it, that maybe for me personally, depending on the minute of any hour of any day, of any week, of falling in love with the CEO of BC Housing. And I knew it was going to be a problem. I've been in this world a long time. I've been leading Atira for 17 or 18 years when that happened. So I wasn't new to this job. I had it for a very long time. I remember having that conversation and thinking, you know, do I really want to do this? Because it's going to wear on me in, you know, a thousand times more than it will ever wear on you. Like this is, and so to say that I went into that not expecting this would be a lie. I knew, and I made the decision to stay in the relationship anyway. You know, we don't always have the luxury of choosing who we connect with, I guess. And so, yeah, I hear the whispers behind my back. I hear, often they're not whispers behind my back. They're columns in newspapers.
Yeah.
And it's something you just kind of sadly have to get used to. You know, a lot of women experience a lot of women in positions of power or who have audiences experience a lot worse than I do. But it's hard. And you know, it's the whispers from people you think are friends or think that you have a good relationship, but then it's also the emails from random, typically white men who you know, want to see you raped and with a needle out of your arm, living in an SRO or whatever nice emails they send you. I've got a Hoover file full of them, and everything in between, and it's just, you know, it's part of the work. And I think you're right. I think it's part me, and it's part the fact that Atira is grown into a big organization, and it's a feminist, it's a women-led, all women board, women feminist focus, not feminist focus, just an intersectional feminist organization. And I think that frightens a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking also about the kind of attacks, like when other housing organizations were also doing things that were just harm reduction with women involved in sex work. Atira got called out for running, you know, for living off the avails of prostitution. And
not so much Atira, that was me personally. Yeah. I was referred to as a madam. Yeah. And so it was me personally and Atira. Yeah, I think, yeah, it just.
And yet, what I'm thinking about is just other housing organizations led by men were doing some of the same kind of harm reduction based stuff with people doing sex work, but it was never got that personal. And no. Also, I didn't see any of those organizations come out and support you. They no. Could have left you to take it, which really I thought was a real lack of an opportunity to walk your talk if you're saying that the organization's tied to some feminist values or acts in solidarity, right?
Yeah, I feel like I wear a lot of and do a lot of work for the sector. I say a lot of things because I get criticized or called on so much. I say a lot of things and do a lot of work. And you're right. I often, you know, I have good relationships with a number of the other EDs or CEOs, and I'll often get quiet calls.
Yeah.
Great job, or I'm glad you said that. But you're right. People are very, very reluctant to speak out publicly, even though you're right. Lots of organizations are doing similar work.
Yeah, similar excellent work that they're so proud of.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Well, look, is there anything else just swimming around your noodle that you just want to say?
Not really. I'm, watching the park rangers across the street require a group of campers to pack their stuff up. One of them looks like he has a gun on his hip, and thinking that how that's just a analogy for everything right now in the moment, um, and wondering where they're going to go. So yeah, that's I have lived and worked in the downtown east side since the 2000 or early 2001, I guess, and nothing much really changes.
Mhm.
So yeah, so right now in this moment, I'm feeling a bit unhopeful as opposed to having faith in humankind. I don't know why I'm smiling.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that's a great way. You're feeling unhopeful and you don't know why you're smiling. You've got this
Yeah.
beautiful tension. Look at big respect for you, Atira, all you shoulder up collectively. Yeah, and the way you've centered people's voices who were never meant to be heard. Like Audre Lorde said, never meant to be alive. This is fantastic.
Thanks, Vikki. Thanks to you too for everything.